Hey, what's going on? It's Anthony back with another episode of the Heroic Industries podcast. I never know how to start these. It's always real weird because you're sitting in a room talking to yourself, and it just is awkward. So I start thinking about all the podcasts that are annoying and try not to be like them. But sometimes you end up doing the same crap, and you're like, that's what annoys me about other people's shows. I shouldn't do that. But I do it anyway, just because I don't know what else to do. So, anyway, I'm just going to start every show like Conan O'Brien. Just say how great it is. And I know last night's show was great. I said it was great, but now this one's going to be super great. This is going to be even better than last night's show. So, there you go. This is a solid show. Finally got a guest on. So, talked to Greg Anderson. You can find him on Instagram at Granderson33 on the gram. But he was a really interesting dude to talk to, that's for sure. Married, father of three. He was an Army Ranger, a military contractor after that, and a law enforcement officer from 2011 to 2020 when he was actually terminated. We talked about that whole story, which was very, very interesting. And also owns Electric North Jiu-Jitsu in Lake Stevens, Washington, is a black belt, and is the founder of an organization called Guns and Geese Shooting and Jiu-Jitsu Immersion Camp, which we talked about a little bit too, and I'm really pumped about that. I will definitely keep everybody posted on the status of that, because I will be attending one in the near future. I'm not sure of dates yet, but I am definitely going to attend that. It looks incredibly cool. It's a 3-day course, a 2 or 3 day course. Listen to the episode all the way to the end. We talk about it at the end of the show, but very, very cool stuff that he's doing, and very, very interesting story, especially from a law enforcement perspective. Being able to hear him talk the way he can now, not working for a department, is very interesting. So. It's a long one. It's about 90 minutes of conversation, and take it in chunks. We talked about everything from jiu-jitsu to CrossFit to business to family to all kinds of stuff, to PTSD. I mean, you name it, we covered it. So, real interesting show. Really great dude. Check him out, and let me know what you think.
That's part of the beauty of not being in the profession anymore, is that I don't have to worry about if this violates that policy or if it offends this person. Like, it's freeing, and I'm digging it.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I know that's and that's something I want to talk about at some point. Is well, why don't we just start there? Why do you think, like, as cops, we don't say more to like defend ourselves? It's like we always just kind of just take it.
I feel like it's become just this whole movement of wokeness and how, like, the radical left has a narrative that we're supposed to abide by. And if you notice, cops can speak out and they can support BLM, they can support certain movements, they can support certain groups of people. But as long as it's in line with the narrative that's being fed, then it's okay for them to do so. But if they express an opinion on the other side of the fence, such as the one that I expressed, now it's this big problem. And I think that's one of the problems that the profession is facing as a whole, is that we don't allow cops to be human beings and be able to express who they are as people. And it's like, you have to fall in line with this narrative. And if you step outside of it, then it's like everybody's coming after you. And it's a bizarre place that the profession has found itself in. And the thing is like, obviously anyone that listens to me or listens to my show, they know that I hold conservative values. I'm on the right side of most political things, but at the same time, I'm a very accepting person. I have friends that are gay. I have like friends in all different demographics of people. I own a jiu-jitsu academy, and if you train jiu-jitsu and CrossFit, that brings a conglomerate of people. And I have no problem with people being different, But what I do have a problem with is people that don't allow you to be yourself. And I feel like the profession of law enforcement is primarily conservative people, but for whatever reason, they're not allowed to express any type of conservative views. I mean, you saw literally this week, they're saying the investigation of the police officers that attended Trump's rally is going to come to a conclusion. What are we talking about? You can't go to a rally to support your president. And we're not talking about the ones that stormed into the Capitol. Those are two very different things, right? But the profession has reached a point now where we have to answer to this like woke mob. And it's gotten so bad that you can't even go support your president.
Yeah, and the ironic thing about that is like you said, if you fall in line to the standard narrative that is being pushed by the woke, then you're good. Then you're one of the quote good cops, right?
Yeah.
But what does that actually lead to when you expand that out not even a lot, just a little bit with your thought process? Like, okay, so you want cops that are only going to adhere to the popular belief. That's what they want, right? So
Yes.
what is that going to lead to if I never speak out in a dissenting opinion, or I never say, hey, this is what I think as a human being, as a person, as an individual? Then you take out the individual thought of your officers, who are going to what, like primarily single officer runs. I don't know how it was on your department, but where I'm at, like most of the shit you go to is solo calls. So
Yep.
now you want me to think as a collective and not as an individual when I go to these solo calls. Is that what you want from your cops? Because that's going to equal like more or less violent cops, right? Like way more violent cops, like way more. It's just, you think just a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how far down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole we want to go. And I'm not saying that I have the answers, right? But when I just detach, I step back and I look at what's happening to the profession as a whole, you have to ask yourself, is this calculated? Are they purposely turning the public against police officers? Because that just feels like part of the process where you make these people look like robots, where they don't have opinions, they don't show emotions, they can't just engage in conversation on all these different topics that people just do in day-to-day life. You're a cop, you have to be stoic, and you have to, everything you say is recorded, and you have to adhere to your strict policy and all of these things. But what it does is it widens that gap between the public and us, because cops are just people, and the profession should represent that. We're just people. We have opinions, we have families, we have ideas. And I'm not saying necessarily, I mean, one thing that I caught a lot of flack for, they're like, well, you did it on duty and you used your social media to express your views, and that's not fair to the department. And it's like, on one hand, I can kind of understand that to a certain extent. But the other side of the fence is people need to know that there are police officers out there that think like them, that share their ideas, that are on their side. And from what I was seeing, people weren't getting that. A lot of people felt like the profession was being turned against them and cops were being used as henchmen and all the stuff that we saw. I mean, I don't know if you saw that video yesterday of the pastor being arrested in Canada.
In Canada. Yeah. Canada is a nightmare.
Insane.
Yeah.
And you have that police officer standing there going, I don't want to do this. I'm not taking any pleasure in this, but it's my job. And the thing is, it's like, I look at that situation and rewind to a year ago when I made my video. I look at that situation and I say, that's going to go bad. At some point, you're going to, and this isn't like me trying to sound like a tough guy, but if you try and take me away in handcuffs while my children are watching me standing there bawling, simply because I went to church, we're probably going to fight to the death. And I've come to that conclusion. I've drawn those hard lines, and I feel like it's just continuously a systematic approach to make police officers look like the bad guy. But then the ironic thing is there's some cops out there that are embracing that role, such as those ones, and people are like, oh, that's Canada. That's our next door neighbors.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, yes, it's different, but it's close enough. And our countries share enough ideology and enough values that should be concerning to Americans too, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, it's geographically it's close, but ideologically it's very close. And
Exactly.
there are very few things separating that behavior coming here, and too many people, especially that I've talked to over the last year, are just like, oh, we would never get to that point. We would never do that here. Are you serious? Look around. Look, it's
Yeah,
happening.
it's happening everywhere. And that is one thing that really like motivated me to take a hard stance on this, is because every cop that I know says, I wouldn't do that. I would never violate somebody's rights. Or a big one is I would never partake in any type of gun seizure, right? It's easy to sit here and say I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. But then when your chain of command says, hey, go out here and do this, and you have 3 kids at home to feed, now it's a little different. And now you're really going to have to dig deep and say, okay, where do I stand on this? And what did we see? We saw cops across America doing what they were told, not what they believed was right. And the thing is, you can look at history. Just because something is legislated and something is a law, that doesn't mean that it's moral or ethical, right? Now, I'm not saying every cop should interpret every single law and be like, well, I'm going to enforce this one, I'm not going to enforce that one. I understand that gets kind of muddy quickly. But at the same time, when you have a mayor or a governor saying, hey, go do this, and it's not legislated and it's not a law, and if it feels wrong on the inside, not only should you, but I feel like police officers are duty bound to raise their hand and be like, hey, that's not what I signed up to do. I'm here to serve the public. I'm not here to be used as a tool against them. And man, I'm telling you, that whole era where people couldn't go to the parks, and if you had too many people at your house for dinner, cops were knocking on your door, that should have lasted 15 minutes, because the profession as a whole should have raised their hand and been like, nope, I don't know who you think we are as a profession, but you have it all wrong. But that's not incumbent on the patrol level officer. I was a patrol level officer that spoke out just because I was disgusted. The people to blame for this are the chiefs and the sheriffs, because this was their opportunity to show leadership, stand up, and defy these tyrannical orders. But once you start, as you know, once you start getting up too high in the chain of command structure, they're playing politics.
Oh, for sure. I mean, their job is politics. If they don't walk the line, they will be out of a job.
That's right.
Yeah. And then too, I think there's a disconnect between between like a chief level, like they don't have to go and knock on the doors and say, get those people out of your house. Like it's going to be you and me. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think as cops, a lot of times we forget that, like when you get hired, like, what do you want to do? You want to go out and like, and chase bad guys. You want to go and take people to jail and enforce laws and have adventures. That's what you want. You want to play cops and robbers. That's why everybody becomes a cop, at the roots level. But
and a little caveat on that is every single cop I know, when they're new and that's their desire, they want to find bad people doing bad things. There's a big public misconception that a lot of cops are like badge heavy pricks that got into the job just because they want to have power that they've never had and they want to shit on people. And I'm not saying that those cops don't exist.
Right.
But in my experience, by and large, the majority of people in the profession are good-hearted people that are there for the right reasons, just like you said, to look for bad people and put them away.
Yeah, and absolutely. And what I think when we go into that mindset, sometimes we get so narrow focused that it's like, okay, our job is to enforce laws, when really our job is to uphold the Constitution at a state and national level. So like we have to understand that there are times if we have objectives that were given or orders that were given that don't stand up with that, our job is also to say, no, we are not going to enforce that. I am not going to do that because my job is to serve. And I have to understand and be able to look at even directives that are given to me and say, no, that doesn't fit with protection of the Constitution. I'm not doing that. And
as soon as you're not willing to do that, you're no longer a public servant. You know what I'm saying? As
Yeah.
soon as as soon as you're no longer to stand on the side of right and draw hard lines, now you're just doing what you're told. And I hate the analogy slippery slope, but that's what it is. Because today it's a mom in the park, and tomorrow it's because you had too many people over for dinner. And where does it go from there? You know?
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need to have a zero tolerance on these kind of issues, both as police officers and as the public. And I'm not advocating violence, but at the same time, you shouldn't have to sit by and be subjected to de facto arrest just because you live in a jurisdiction where somebody thinks that that's a good idea, you know?
Yeah, and that's another thing I've told people over the last year as well, is like, you need to understand what's going on, where things are moving, and where your lines are. And then from there, like, you understand that, like, all right, my line is here. And then there's going to be a consequence for not adhering to that based on your standards. And you have
Yeah.
to be willing to accept that. And what I found is communicating that to people and saying, hey, this is my line. I'm not doing this. And if you want to go here, this is going to be how I'm going to react. Now, what are you going to do? And it was even to the point where I think I had a conversation with a waitress during the whole, like, everyone must wear a full face shield wherever. I finally told her, I'm not doing that, and I'm not going to comply with your rules here. Now, are you going to sell me my food or not? And if you just put it like, not mean, just have, this is my standard, this is where my line is. Are you going to adhere to what I'm doing or not? And then,
Yeah.
then the ball in their court. Usually, normal people are not prepared to deal with conflict, and they'll
No.
just kind of be like, okay, fine. Which is why we
Yeah.
got to this point in the first place. But if you just start re-engineering that backwards, most people don't know what to do, and they just say, okay, fine. So,
Well, and one of the biggest problems with all of that stuff, the face shields and the mask, and you have to be this far apart, like, I would say like probably 99% of the people that were tasked with enforcing this stuff, like the waitresses, the cashiers at the grocery store, the greeters at Walmart, like all of these people that just wake up and go to work, they don't give a shit about it. They don't personally care. They're simply regurgitating what their bosses told them. And it's very similar to, like you were saying, with a chief of police. That's not the person that goes and knocks on the door. It's same thing. Some corporate Walmart executive that has some office in some high-rise building puts out this policy, and now you expect your cashiers to be confrontational with people, and it puts everybody in a weird position, right?
yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems with this, the last year that we've seen, is you're causing conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict. And the most bizarre thing about it is both people that are involved in the conflict, a lot of times, probably hold the same ideals and the same values, but they're just pitted against each other because of who they work for or what agency they're part of. And it's absolute lunacy. It's crazy that this is where we've arrived at. I don't know if you followed my story very much. Like, once I got fired and I opened my gym back up, dude, I drew those hard lines. I said, I got fired as a police officer, and now my gym has to be open. This is going to be how I feed my children. This is my source of income. And I was very open. I was very vocal about it. And I said, I'm defying Governor Inslee's orders. My gym is open. We're not masked up. We're training jujitsu. The CrossFit is open. If you don't like it, come and fucking try and stop me. And that wasn't me like being inflammatory or trying to incite a fight, even though there's a part of me that's like kind of getting excited about it. But as crazy as it sounds, is, I mean, I was in the military / paramilitary organizations for a decade, right? Then I went into law enforcement for another decade. So this is 20 years of various public service positions that I've held. And then I was thinking, like, dude, the sheriff's office is going to come and they're going to try and shut my business down and take me out of here by force. And I told my wife, I said, it's not going down like that. And I know I'm the crazy one, right? That cop that got fired, now he got in a shootout with the police. Like, that's not what I want. But at the same time, I made that decision. You will not take me out of my own business on my own property in handcuffs. So whatever they want to do, that's on them. And I was bringing my rifle and my body armor and to practice just because I felt like any day I could be going to war. And I know like some people think I'm a lunatic saying that stuff, but look at Ian Smith. Do you follow him?
Yes.
How many times was he taken out of his gym in handcuffs? Oh, over and over and over, you know? And I love that dude. I'm actually doing a podcast with him. We have it scheduled in August. This should be a fun episode.
That's awesome.
But the thing is like what I was seeing, it wasn't something I was contriving in my mind. That's the reality that we were living through, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So we probably should have done this a few minutes earlier, but let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about how you ended up getting fired. Because I mean, honestly, like I just started following you not too long ago, and I'm trying to backtrack and like piece that together. So I'm not even really sure. Like I'm not really clear on it 100%.
Yeah, we got connected through Christy Campbell.
Yeah,
who's one of my jiu-jitsu students. She's been on the podcast a couple of times. She's a fucking stud.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I made the video May 5th of 2020, a few months into all of the madness. And I just realized like the public and police officers need to hear this opinion coming from a uniformed police officer. And so I made the video simply stating that that's not what we do. That's not who we are as a profession. And it was well received by most police officers. Even my own chain of command, it was well received by initially. And then they flip-flopped because just like we stated earlier, they're playing politics. So somebody somewhere said, oh, hey, you can't have one of your officers saying that kind of stuff. So then they got back a hold of me and said, hey, I know I expressed that it was a good video a couple hours ago, but I've been directed to tell you to take it down. I said, really? 3 hours ago, you said it was a great message to share, and now it needs to come down.
So the message that you said, like you just said in uniform, basically like, hey, this whole like shutting down your business thing, like we're enforcing these mandates that aren't laws. Like we're not about that, and we're not doing that. That's all it's.
Yeah. And I implored other police officers to look at what's right, apply integrity. And where's your moral compass? Because if you're shutting down some 60-year-old lady's candle shop because your mayor said, and I saw that's why I use that as an example, a candle shop in New Jersey. Some cop walked in there and was like, the governor says you can't be open, so I have to forcefully close your business. And it's like, I could only see so many of these incidents before I'm like, listen, this is a message from a police officer to other police officers. If you were told to shut down somebody's business, you're told to arrest a lady at a park, if you're told to arrest somebody surfing, I'm sure you saw that. They had 2 police boats chasing a surfer in Malibu, California. Just the kind of things that we are seeing. My biggest concern is that they were going to turn the public against the profession. And how long have you been a police officer for?
14 years almost.
Okay, so there's always an ebb and flow of our reputation based on what the media is pushing out, kind of flavor of the week, right? And I felt like the reputation of the profession had been on a good trajectory for a while. And dude, being a cop wasn't bad. You know, like we were at a time where things seemed pretty good. And I was like, this is going to be the catalyst that makes everybody hate police officers again. And I was concerned about that. And so I made that video imploring police officers to do the right thing, to side with the public, to side with the Constitution. And here's the fucking crazy thing about it. I'm a police officer publicly speaking to other police officers, telling them to respect people's constitutional rights. You can't have that, right? like in what world is that considered a bad thing? But because I live on the left coast and all of everybody from our chain of command in any political realm is pretty far left leaning, dude, they're like, get this guy out of here. And so I was put on administrative leave the next day, May 6th. Well, they investigated, and you know how those go. It went for, May, June, July, August. So it was 3 months. And then on August 8th, I was terminated for making the video. And what they said I was terminated for was insubordination because they told me take the video down, and I said the video's not coming down. And here's one of the biggest reasons I couldn't take that video down. In the video itself, I tell police officers, if you lose your job over standing up for what you believe to be morally and ethically correct, then you have to be willing to do that. You can't step outside of your moral compass for your paycheck. We can't do that as police officers, period. Because once you do that, where does it stop? I mean, I literally said that in the video. So how could I then pull the video down the next day because they told me I had to? You know what I mean? I told them, I said, I'm in a position right now where my reputation is on the line. And unfortunately, the video has to stay. So if you have to fire me for publicly defending the Constitution, then that's what you're going to have to do. And then that's what they did. So,
well, that's exactly what I was kind of talking about earlier. Where it's like, here's my line. If you're going to fire me for this, I'm going to make you fire me for this. And they said, okay.
Yeah. Okay. and well, the funny thing is too, is they're like, Greg, and I was well respected in the agency, both by my peers and my chain of command. I have no discipline. I was always a good officer. And so that's why they were like, they were trying to play like, hey, Greg, listen, this is crazy. You don't need to do this. Just take it down, take a letter of reprimand, and it'll be done. It'll be behind us. I'm like, I don't think you guys understand what I'm saying. The answer is no. Okay. And they're like, well, we don't want to fire you. If you're going to be like this and you're going to take this hard stand, why don't you just resign and walk away? And I was like, because that'd be too fucking easy for you, wouldn't it? You know? And the department caught a lot of flack. They were getting 1,000 complaints a day. Like I had to make a follow-on video telling them or speaking to the public saying, listen, if you want to voice displeasure to my agency, I appreciate it. I love the support, but please don't call the emergency line, because that's what they were doing, right? Like our dispatch was plugged with complaints all day. And it's like, that's why I made that follow-on video, and I'm like, listen, guys, I understand that you want to support me, and I understand that you guys are disgusted in how this is playing out. But at the end of the day, if a 911 line is plugged with complaints and then somebody's in cardiac arrest, you can see why that's a problem, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Go to the right channels with it. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So let's talk about your gym a little bit. Did you run that while you were a cop? Obviously, like when did that start?
Yes.
Your police career?
Yeah. So my career is kind of all over the place. And it's funny because anytime there's any discrepancy on the internet, suddenly you're a liar. And I was never a cop, and I was never this, and I was never that. But what ended up happening is I was a law enforcement officer in Los Angeles from 2011 until 2015. And I always wanted to move back to Seattle because this is where I was born and raised. This is where my family's at, my wife's family. And so in 2015, I left that agency to move back to Seattle, started my gym then. So I opened my jiu-jitsu academy and my CrossFit gym in 2015. And then I got hired by a Seattle-based agency, the Port of Seattle, and was with them up until 2020. That whole time that I was with the Port of Seattle, I had my gym as well. But my gym was more of, I mean, we had like probably 25 members, and it was more of just something that was a hobby that I did on the side. I mean, with 25 members, it would kind of basically support itself, but it wasn't making any money. And there's not a lot of money to be made, I feel like, in jiu-jitsu gyms, period. But I didn't take it serious as a business approach. Really, it was just about honing my skills and then building a team of killers. And that's what we did for years and years and years. Same small group of guys just grinding day in and day out. But it wasn't until after I got fired that I said, okay, if this is my sole focus now, how do I grow this gym? How do I make this gym be better than it is? And the gym's doing awesome now. There's several reasons behind that. A big part of it is we started a kids program. And one interesting aspect that I found by offering kids programs is their parents are sitting on the sidelines watching, and then the wheels start turning and they say, I, I could try this, And jujitsu is actually a really unique activity where a 35-year-old man can share a passion with his 7-year-old son, and they can train together and they can share the mats together. Now they're on this journey, and it's cool to see that like there's been a big like family approach to jiu-jitsu at my gym lately. And then the other side of it is we defied the lockdown orders. I said, I'm not closing down. And because of that, we were the only show in town. And so our CrossFit side of the house, a lot of people are intimidated by CrossFit. And it's just, I mean, CrossFit, if done incorrectly, it can be dangerous and it can be silly, right? But that goes with everything in life.
Right.
If you have good, competent coaches that know how to scale things and take care of people, CrossFit can be a very healthy activity. And so we noticed a lot of people coming in from like Globo gyms or yoga or Pilates, like all these different activities that people do to stay in shape, suddenly were taken away from them. But hey, this CrossFit and this jiu-jitsu gym are open. Let's go check it out. And then once people came and they saw and they started training, they realized like we actually have a very healthy community. We have a good sense of camaraderie in our gym. And I think a lot of people bought off on what we are. And now they've stuck around, even though the lockdowns are lifted now.
Yeah.
So kind of a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, I started, so I got hired as a police officer in 2007. And then, finished Top Fit in our academy, played college sports, did that whole thing, and then found CrossFit as a way to stay in shape, like tactically, as an athlete. And that was back when it was like still pretty grassroots, like before the games and all that. So it was all very military, law enforcement, fire driven. And then 2010 through 13, I started competing really heavy and got good at that. And then opened up, I tried to open up a non-for-profit for our department, and that ended up not working out. So I started my own gym and ran that basically full-time on top of the full-time on top of everything else. So the fact that you're saying like now you have time to develop your facility, like that makes total sense. And I think you're just going to find more and more success with that as you go. Because like, I ended up selling my gym in November. We were one of like a late term COVID casualty. I lost like 2/3 of my member base during our lockdown. And what, I don't know if you had this experience, but what I had was I expected when our lockdowns got lifted, and they lifted in here locally in the Midwest sooner than on the coasts, obviously. But I expected like another New Year's like boom where people would get right back into it. But people were fucking scared and they wouldn't come in, and it just like the bleeding didn't stop. So finally I was like, I got to figure something out. So I ended up selling it. And it worked out okay, but not obviously what I would have wanted to see. But did you have some of those experiences with opening back up or not?
No, because we opened up so far ahead of when we were supposed to that, like I said, I feel like we attracted the right people, because if you have a gym that's defying the governor's orders and you're afraid of COVID and you think that the masks are the end all be all, you're probably not the person that's going to show up and say, hey, I want to sign up, And so I think I honestly think by opening up and defying the orders that we grew our tribe. We attracted the right kind of people, the kind of people that we want to be there. And so, yeah, our memberships, we have 5 times the amount of members that we had pre-lockdown.
That's awesome.
Yeah, on both CrossFit and Jiu-Jitsu, and so.
Do you own the CrossFit side of things too?
So I own the facility, and then I run and own the Jiu-Jitsu side of the house, but the CrossFit itself is ran by a friend of mine, and the LLC is under his name, and he's the actual owner.
Okay, so. Cool. Yeah, I've been trying to figure out a way to like co-mingle those two from mostly a selfish standpoint, as I was the owner of the CrossFit gym. And I was like, man, I really want to train more jiu-jitsu, because I've always been like very haphazard with that. Like I'll do it when I can do it, and then I'll be gone for like a year, and then, just your classic, like inconsistent.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, if I can get something here, then selfishly, I won't have to go anywhere else and I can train more.
Dude, I can tell you, because our CrossFit was up and running for a while before I added jiu-jitsu. because we had to build a second story on the facility, and then that's where we put our mat room. And so it was a while behind CrossFit. So CrossFit was pretty established, up and running. And I was like, man, we got a bunch of strong, cool dudes that are athletic as fuck. Like jiu-jitsu is going to blow up right away. We have almost zero crossover between jiu-jitsu and CrossFit. Almost zero.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I literally think we have 2 people. So I have 140 students in jiu-jitsu. 2 of them are also do CrossFit downstairs. So yeah, I guess it's just a different culture, or whatever's appealing about one doesn't seem to appeal to the other. I'm not sure what's going on, but
yeah, that's weird. I wonder if other people have some experiences like that are consistent. Because I would think that like being so involved in CrossFit and like mildly involved in jiu-jitsu, like I've finally been able to like hit a stride where I'm training 2-3 days a week consistently for the last several months now. But being involved in both, at least here, I could see more jiu-jitsu transitioning to CrossFit rather than vice versa. I think there's this whole like, at least with CrossFit, it's like, well, I can think I'm pretty tough if I can throw some weight around, but I don't have to touch anybody. You know what I mean? And false ego.
Yeah, and I've seen that a few times where guys will come upstairs to the mat room who are really good athletes. And that's the power of jiu-jitsu. It doesn't matter. Obviously, at the highest level of jiu-jitsu, you have to be an elite athlete on top of it. But on the lower levels of jiu-jitsu, if you're a guy that works at Boeing and you're a purple belt and you train 3 days a week and you're not some super athlete, a person that doesn't train, you're going to get on top of that person. You're going to strangle them. That's how it's going to go. Right. And so there's been times when guys will come up that are good athletes, and then they'll just get demolished by a guy that you would look at and think that this shouldn't be happening to me. and more often than not, you don't see those people come back.
Yeah, it's just this huge ego beatdown. I think, well, a couple questions. So, like, you being a black belt in jiu-jitsu, that's also been involved in CrossFit and law enforcement, that kind of stuff. Now, the one thing that's always kind of bugged me when I used to train at a Gracie gym is that their big catchphrase that jiu-jitsu can neutralize basically all strength. And my experience has been that that's not the case.
That's absolutely not the case.
Now, if I roll with like a good blue belt or higher being just a white belt, like I'm probably going to get handled. Like obviously the higher belts like purple, brown, and black, like I'm going to get killed. But there's a whole lot of shit that I can do to neutralize people based on being strong and having like a little bit of wrestling.
100%. And that's where like there's no absolutes in this world, and people that are all in with jiu-jitsu and say like jiu-jitsu is the end all be all, you're not being honest with yourself. I've obviously bought off on jiu-jitsu. I've been rolling consistently for 18 years now, and I believe in the art, and I believe that it's the best self-defense art. I believe it's the best art for police officers to use. But let's not start telling ourselves lies about what it is. If you're a 125-pound female who's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and you have a nasty guard and you got good sweeps, and I don't care how good you are at jiu-jitsu, if you have to fight a dude that's 260 pounds who was a fucking rugby player, good luck. You know what I mean? Let's be honest about what jiu-jitsu is. It's a great tool. And it doesn't matter who you are. You can hone your skill and you can be a better version of yourself. But at the end of the day, I know this isn't a popular thing to say, we're not all equal. Period. Like the reason I bring up white belt or rugby is because I have a new white belt who is a rugby player his whole life, and he's 235 pounds, and he is mauling people. He's absolutely mauling people. And that's because a lot of what wins fights is aggression, strength, movement, the ability to scramble, the ability to find your base, the ability to have good hips, all of these things that come from all kinds of different athletic backgrounds, right? And so I tell my jiu-jitsu students, I don't like the, hey, keep it playful and like kind of the bullshit jiu-jitsu approach. I want my students to hone their jiu-jitsu in a manner where it's going to work on the street. It's going to work in a real world fight. It's going to work when you have to protect your family. And so I tell my students, if you're strong, use your strength. If you're fast, use your speed. If you have a good gas tank, try and outwork your opponent and tire them out, right? Use your physical attributes to benefit your jiu-jitsu. Now, with all that said, just because you're strong, I'm not saying your whole game should rely on your strength, because you also need to hone your weaknesses. That's very important too. But don't think because you're a big, strong guy that you shouldn't develop a game around getting on top of people, using top pressure, smashing, and incapacitating someone. Isn't that what we want? We want to win. And so it would make no sense to tell a big, strong, athletic guy like, no, just focus on your guard, you know? And dude, we all know, anybody that rolls knows, like, I'm 205 pounds. So I'm not a big guy, but I'm not a little guy. I'm right in the middle, right? Because I got guys on my team that are 280. 280 pounds is a problem. I don't care how good you are. It's a problem. Whereas 150 pounds, that's a very different. Now I'm the big guy. You know what I'm saying? And I have a new female and she's probably 105 pounds. And it's like, I'm two of her. Good luck ever defeating me, no matter how good your jiu-jitsu gets. That's just the reality of the world that we live in, you know?
Yeah, that's simply physics. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
That's mass versus mass. It's just like when you're talking about powerlifting. What do you do if you want your bench to go up? Well, number one is you try to gain some weight, because you will bench more if you weigh more. Like, that's how it works. It's how gravity and physics work. But yeah, a lot of this stuff that you're talking about is the same thing that I tell like new officers in general, but specifically anybody that's like a little smaller, or like female officers, especially. Like, the use of force is going to change based on your physical stature.
100%. 105-pound female can shoot someone a lot sooner than a 205-pound black belt.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. You are justified to do that based on the fact that mass versus mass, this doesn't equal out,
Yeah.
And then you have to be able to develop, like you said, like, develop a game plan for your strengths to fight your fight. And the same is true in jiu-jitsu, but it's also true with on the street. Like, I got to know how to cut an angle differently than somebody that has a black belt, or a female that's, half my size. Like, that has to happen.
And so when I say these things, like, the last thing that I want that to do is discourage anyone from training. If you're a small female and you're thinking, oh, well, this guy's saying that jiu-jitsu won't work for me. No. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, trained opponent versus trained opponent, it's a huge disadvantage to be a much smaller person, right? And even trained versus untrained, being significantly smaller, it is a disadvantage. But if you're trained, if you're highly trained and your opponent is not highly trained, there's a good chance that you will be able to work your way to the back, get a hold of that neck, and put that person out. And so that's where jiu-jitsu does become extremely powerful. And that's why I do think all officers should be training, especially small females, because I don't know if you follow sport jiu-jitsu at all, but there's a guy named Marcelo Garcia who was, for a period of time, widely regarded as the best guy in the world. And he weighed 160 pounds, was not a big guy. And he'd go fight the open weight division, fighting 300-pound dudes. But he would figure out how to get to the back. And once you're on somebody's back and you're smaller than them, you're like a little backpack, and you would watch him do it over and over and over again, get to the back, find the neck, put him out. And so if you can develop a skill set that works for your body type, jiu-jitsu will work. I'm simply saying, I'm not going to sell it as something that it's not. The bigger, stronger opponent has an advantage. It just is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially if you fall into any of an outlier, like if you look at a bell curve, right? And you say, all right, where are most people's like body weights and stuff like that? Like, you're going to have the smaller on one side and the way bigger on the other side. So I think, both, like, we're not just talking about like females or small dudes or whoever, right? We're also talking about like anybody that has a lot of weight to lose, like that kind of stuff. Like, those populations, I think, need to train more in order to bring them sort of back to the middle, regardless of if it's going to work, if it's not going to work. Like, any training is going to work to
Yeah.
keep you better trained, and it's going to give you a better chance of survival. And it's going to get you, if you're smaller and you need to gain some muscle or something like that, like it's going to help you do that. Or if you're bigger and you got some fat to lose, like it's going to help you do that. So it's going to bring you towards the middle if you are on one of those outliers.
For sure. Yeah. And then the other thing that I always tell people is I always joke at my gym, 10% of what we're doing on these mats has to do with choking people, like, and it's the same thing with a good CrossFit gym or good jiu-jitsu academy is you start to build your tribe that you start to share adversity and you go through hardships with people and you develop camaraderie and that those become your people and you come to jiu-jitsu to train and hone that art. But I'm not kidding. Like practice ends at 7:30 p.m. There's most days I'm not locking the door until 8:30. And that's because everybody's talking about their day. They're talking about how their roles went and that we're building community. And community is one of the most underrated thing in our culture. I feel like we sit in our house, we watch TV, we drive to work, we sit in our cubicles, and then we commute and we're stuck in traffic for 2 hours. And then you just push repeat and it's Groundhog's Day, right? Yeah. I think one thing we're missing is that tribal desire to sit around the fire at night and share our thoughts, share our opinions. And that is what a gym like a CrossFit gym or a jiu-jitsu academy, it fills that void. And I'm telling you, man, like I'm sure you saw it at your gym. Like that's one of the most important aspects of finding the right gym and being around the right people and then becoming a healthier person, becoming a fitter person, becoming a more capable person. That's a byproduct of immersion in the correct environment.
Yeah, that's enough. I've been to tons of CrossFit gyms. I'm sure you have too. And the ones that are good is it's all about culture. Now their coaches are usually good too, but that's not like I've been to some gyms where the coaching is outstanding and they're games level athletes. They know the movements, but they're kind of assholes. And I really don't want to go back, so that's what I tell, I still do actually the gym that I sold. I now kind of work for.
Is that where you're sitting right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I see someone on the rower behind, or a few minutes ago, someone was rowing behind you in the background.
Yep. So I that's why I tell the new coaches that are coming on now are onboarding for the new owners is that it's a lot less about knowing the perfect coaching cues and really just creating a great environment to get better and keeping people safe. If you can do those, like you can coach CrossFit for sure.
For sure. Yep. One thing that like my jiu-jitsu gym and the culture that we're creating, it's always evolving, right? Because you're always trying to make it better and offer something that's more meaningful to people. But like I told you earlier, in the beginning, when we were just a team of 20 killers, right? It's like, we just want to be the toughest guys that we can be. What you find is you start to exclude other people. I've had guys come up and be intimidated because there's 15 dudes that are all shredded and abs bulging out and we're trying to kill each other. Now they don't feel like they're part of that culture, right? And me and my coach, we actually drove from Coeur d'Alene to Seattle one day, did a seminar out there. So we had a 5-hour conversation and he's a multiple time world champion, one of the best guys in the world. His name's João Assis. He's a Brazilian guy. And he had an epiphany where it's like, instead of building a team of killers, he goes, you need to approach jiu-jitsu as jiu-jitsu's for everyone. Okay. If you're an overweight mom, that's an at-home mom that just shuttles kids around all day, we need to build a gym that's jiu-jitsu's for her. Jiu-jitsu's for your guys that work at Amazon that have never done anything athletic in their life. Jiu-jitsu's for them. And what you realize is by creating an environment that's welcoming to everybody, it doesn't water down what we're doing. Your killers are still going to be your killers. You're going to have some people that put more effort in than other people. You're going to have some people that get way better than other people. But what you're doing is you're creating a welcoming environment where everybody feels like they're part of the team. They're part of what we're doing here. And we both kind of shifted our gyms from trying to build killers to creating an environment where people felt comfortable And I'm telling you, man, as soon as we did that, it was a game changer. Because he also joked, he said, your killers are also your worst customers, right? It's
Yes.
like, hey, it's great that they're winning all the tournaments, but they are always late on paying. They always have a reason why their card got declined. And then the other side of it is, and I'm sure it's the same in CrossFit, if you're chasing CrossFit games, you have to be kind of selfish,
Yeah.
because you have to worry about you. You are your own priority, not necessarily the team, right? And so the guys that are chasing like a world championship, they're going to do what suits them best, and rightfully so, right? But what you find is when the grass is greener somewhere, or it makes sense to change teams or do this or do that, that's what happens. And so you build a gym where jiu-jitsu is for everyone, and what you find is you actually have a higher level of loyalty, because you're changing people's lives and they're seeing that change in real time, and now they're committed to the team. It's a different thing, but it's a cool shift that we made, and I'm glad we did it.
Yeah. So Jason Kalipa, he's a old CrossFit James
Yeah.
game. So he was in, I think he started NorCal. CrossFit NorCal is now NC Fit is his thing, but he talks about that same thing with CrossFit. He says the 99%, the general community, that's who you need, and that will bring you the 1% of the CrossFit Games athletes. But if you go after the 1% and try to make your gym this epic games level, everybody's serious all the time, like that won't get you the 99%, and you'll probably go out of business shortly.
Exactly. And that's another important aspect that, like, I don't know why it would not be something that we should be open about. But at the end of the day, if you're investing your time and your money into something, you want it to produce and give back. It needs to be financially successful. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, right? And and it's cool to have one of those gyms where you and four games level athletes just get after it every day. And if you can afford to create something like that, cool. But for things to be self-sustaining, you have to appeal to a wider range of people.
Yeah. Because like, to be totally honest, like the money matters,
Of course it matters.
You need the money to make sense, or you're being selfish and you're being stupid too,
Yeah. I always feel like if people that say like, I don't give a shit about money and I'm chasing passion, not money, like anyone that downplays the importance of money, I just don't think they're being honest with themselves. Because if you like a car, if you like a house, if you like your kids to eat nutritious foods, there's only one way to do those things, and it's you have to be financially successful. Now, obviously, it's a dichotomy. Money's not everything. If you have more money than me, that doesn't make you a better person or more important. But at the end of the day, you have to find that at least comfortable level to where you can sustain life and do the things you need to do. And in the culture that we are immersed in, that we are a part of, money is important.
Yeah. And it's, it is a weird dichotomy, because it's like, I'm sure you've found this with sales, is like, if you come across too driven to close a sale, a lot of times it'll push people, it'll shut people off, because they'll just sense there's something off. Or like, I know this dude just wants to close a sale. He doesn't care about me. So the passion has to be the driver, but you can't just do it for free either, because then it devalues you, and it also won't close sales. If you're just like, oh, I don't care about money at all, I don't need to, like, just come back whenever you feel like it, like they're going to think you're a joke. So it's like you have a high demand for yourself, but you also have to have your passion drive you. So
you're right. And you're walking that line, because it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that I've done at my gym is I want people to feel like, and this is what I tell people, I joke that I'm a good coach. I'm a good person, but I'm kind of a shitty businessman, and that's changing, right? I'm growing and adapting. But I always tell people, I say, I want you to be a member of our gym because you want to be here, not because I want you to be here. I want you to believe in what we're selling and who we are. And I want you to come through this door every day because you want to be here and it's important to you. And because of that, I don't do contracts. I don't do cancellation fees. I don't like structure our payment system to where people are stuck and they're locked in. I tell them, the day you decide you don't want to be a member of this gym, you cancel your membership with one text message. And is it because your schedule changed at work, or maybe you got injured, or maybe you've decided that jujitsu is not for you? Like, whatever your reason is for wanting to walk away from this gym, I respect that. And please walk away, because what we don't want is a bunch of people that feel like they're stuck here. And they're, how many gyms have you like read the online reviews where they're like, I've been trying to cancel my membership for 6 months and I've written 40 emails and then I keep getting the auto draft. Like, and it's like, yeah, that's so you could make some more money doing that. But I also think, just like we said, we're building culture, right? The most important part of a gym is culture. And how can you build a strong culture? You build a strong culture by telling people, making people feel important, but also respecting their choices and respecting what works for them. Because I tell all my students, I said, the reality of jiu-jitsu is it's not for everyone. I've yet to meet the person that is trained and then regretted it, right? That, oh man, I wish I really didn't put 6 months into jiu-jitsu. But with that said, the majority of people don't make it to black belt. At some point in the journey, they've had enough and they walk away. And we have to respect that as gym owners, right? I think that's an important thing that gets left out, because yeah, you want to have as many members as you can, right? But you want to have the right members. And I want to keep the freedom for people to choose what they want to train in. And just because jiu-jitsu is my passion, I have to be realistic with myself. It's not everybody's passion. It's just something that they dabble in, you know?
Yeah, and then too, you have to have enough awareness. And again, like, if your focus is always, it should be the focus of the client or the person in front of you, the member, whoever. Now there might come a point when it's not going to be advantageous for me to do jujitsu or CrossFit anymore the way that we're doing it. So can you refer out? It's kind of like I've got a couple degrees in psychology. We talked about, like, hey, if you have somebody that comes and sits in front of you and you're like, I can't work with this person, you have to be able to refer them out and honestly look at yourself, your skill set, and your ability to truly help them. And that could, and I've had that a handful of times where people come in and they tell me what they want, and I'm like, we don't do that here, but a gym down the road, I know that these people would be perfect for you, and you send them that way. And then that helps build culture, because you never know when, the karmic cycle might come back and all of a sudden they are a good fit for you, but they're going to respect you for the fact that you were honest with them.
I always tell people that, because I believe that I've created a very powerful culture that's welcoming and rewarding, but I don't want people to believe that because I'm telling them that. I want them to believe that because I believe that that's the truth. And so I'll tell people when they're new and they're checking out gyms, and they'll be like, well, I live here and it's a little bit of a commute to come here, but I've heard good things. I'll tell them straight up. I'll say, hey, if you would like, I fully support you checking out the other gym that's closer to your house, and get a feel for their vibe. And I know all the surrounding gyms, and I never talk shit about them. And I'll be like, yeah, I know those guys. They're good guys. Go check them out. See what you think. Because if I lose a sale because somebody decided that a neighboring gym is a better fit for them, that's my problem. That's not their problem. Like, that's a shortcoming on me that needs to be addressed. So instead of pretending that no other gyms exist or the other gyms are shitty, like, no, go check them out. See what you think. 9 times out of 10, they come back because we have something that they don't. We have community. And I get that feedback a lot from people. Like, especially guys that want to be fighters. I've had this happen numerous times where they go to local MMA gyms and they're like, man, like, I showed up and just got the shit beat out of me. And all the dudes were kind of standoffish and kind of rude. And it's like, yeah, the MMA culture and the jiu-jitsu culture are very different things. You know, I did MMA for a long time and I know what that's like. But it's incumbent on us to create that culture that's welcoming, and you prove that to people by letting them have the freedom to go check out other gyms. I've even had students ask me, like, hey, is it, you do gi Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then this other gym does gi on these days, and I'd like to train there too. And some gyms will be like, no, you can't do that. You're a grown ass person. You know what I mean? Like that's your money. You spend your money wherever you want. If you want to be part of 3 different gyms, be part of 3 different gyms. I can't tell you where you can go with your free time. That's a crazy thought to me.
Yeah, this is
And
American, Jack. You can't.
yeah, exactly. Like my Brazilian friends are cursing me right now. No, that you're a creonche if you're part of 2 gyms. And I get that, man. Like it's cool having a gym that's your home, right? Like for me, I grew up, I had one gym that was my home for years and years and years. And I think that's important. But at the end of the day, what's important to me might not be important to you. And so you do you. And if you're here on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and you bring good energy and you're a good training partner, we benefit by having you at our gym, you know?
Yeah. The only thing I would say from a CrossFit standpoint, because I've had people do that too and be like, oh, I want to do like Orange Theory on 2 days and I want to do jujitsu and they want to do everything.
Yeah.
And the only thing I tell them is like, there is a point where you're going to overtrain and get hurt. And there is a point where you're not going to be consistent enough with the programming here to really make a difference, like in the goals that you want. But those are pitfalls. You're going to have to decide that on your own, like where you want to spend your time, energy, and money. That's up to you to figure out.
Yep.
Help facilitate that.
No, and that's a problem. Like that's been a lifelong problem for me is I want to do too much with too little time. You know, it's like, I wish I could do yoga. I wish I could swim. I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that. But now you have to prioritize and decide where your time is most efficiently spent.
Yeah. Well, and then another thing that I run into personally, I'm sure you seem very similar. So you probably have some of the same issues with doing the work is actually the easy part, like going and burning shit down and like just getting after it. Like that's easy. The hard part is to take a rest day, chill the fuck out, go and get into an ice bath and like sleep for an extra 3 hours. Like that's what you need. But it's really, really hard for me to do that because I'd rather go work out again. I'd rather go roll. I'd rather go run. I'd rather go do anything other than take downtime.
Yeah, for sure. Although the older I get, the more I can convince myself to take time off. Yeah. So I just turned 40, so I'm not that old, but dude, I'm starting to feel the 20 years of jiu-jitsu.
Oh yeah. We're about the same age. I turned 40 in December.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I've had both my hips replaced in the last 5 years. So it's like trying to find the new version of how I need to do shit, you know, because
that's a scary place because the reality of the activities that we do, and this is something I'm very open about. And again, it goes back to maybe being a shitty businessman, but I want transparency. And so I tell people that want to train, I said, this is a combat art and it comes with a lot of aches and pains and it comes with a lot of injuries and most are mild, but sometimes, I mean, I had an ACL get torn in my gym on Monday. You know what I mean? Like the game that we're playing comes with risk. And I want you to understand that. But dude, I did, so I have no cartilage in my left knee anymore. And they were talking about needing a full knee replacement. And I actually started shooting peptides. I don't know if you've went down that rabbit hole yet.
Yes, I saw your post on that. And I actually glad you brought that up. I forgot all about it. But yeah, I've used them before with like, tell me the ones you're taking.
BPC 157 and TB 500.
Yep.
And so those are both peptides that are supposedly, I mean, they're for research purposes only, right?
Lab rats. Your lab rats.
I mean, they regenerate tissue and they really help connective tissue, ligaments and tendons and cartilage. And I'm telling you, maybe it's placebo, but almost immediately my knee feels better. Right.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't ran in a long time because of all the problems with my knees. I started shooting peptides, felt good. So what did I decide to do for my first run in like 7 months was Murph with a 25-pound vest on. So I was I was 230 and I did Murph and RX'd, right? And I'm telling you, man, my hips have been aching for a long time now. And it's just like, there you go again. Like, instead of taking a reasonable approach to getting back to running, no, you put a fucking 25-pound vest on and now I'm in pain again. And it's just like, it's story of my life because nothing I do is reasonable. And now I'm continuously paying for it. So
Slightly extreme. Yeah, I know how that feels. The thing that has kind of put a restrictor on me where I'm still going and doing a lot, right? But when you have like your body held together with plastic and metal, knowing that like, hey, if you break these, there is a good chance that you don't get too many like redos where you're going to be in a wheelchair. So chill the fuck out.
Yeah. So what caused I'm assuming it's the degeneration of your hips to where you needed to have them replaced?
Yeah. So you don't have both your hips go out in your 30s because of anything that you did.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like that just doesn't happen. There's something else going on with the joint mechanically. And what it was with mine was that instead of being like round, like if you can see like your hips supposed to be like this, like a nice horseshoe basically, and then your femur head sits deep inside of it and slides and glides really nicely and smoothly. And it's got good cartilage between the joints or between the bones, like in the joint. Mine was dysplastic, so like hip dysplasia almost, and so it was flat and shallow. And when your hips are flat and shallow, they naturally have much less cartilage, about half the cartilage of a normal human. And then if you play sports aggressively, play college sports and CrossFit and police work and jujitsu as where a normal person might need hip replacement 70s and 80s. That's like,
Yeah.
like people. Like I made it to almost 40. Like, okay, well, I had half the joint space, half the cartilage, and I made it half the time. So it sucks. That's just kind of the hand you're dealt. Like we talked about earlier, like life isn't fair. Things aren't fair. That's I've had people ask me a lot, like, do you wish you would have not done things as intensely? And I say, no, like, absolutely not. I wouldn't trade one experience that I've had in my life for both of my hips to come back. Not one. And
no, I like that. That's a good mindset.
The goal of life is not to get to the grave in pristine condition. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like you're designed to go out and to experience the world and to have an impact. And you can't do that if you're trying to skate through unscathed. You do it. That doesn't mean go out and be reckless and stupid, but it also doesn't mean that you sit back and watch the world go by.
Well, and also to have the opposite mindset of that, of man, I wish I did that, or I wish I did this, like coulda, shoulda, woulda, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter at this point. So you can have regrets that don't serve you at all, or you can be proud of the journey that you've taken. And now you're on to a new journey, whatever that path may be,
Yeah. And then, it's always like, you don't know, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that as I'm going through both of my hips falling apart and the intense pain and the fact that like every time you have a major surgery like that, like, man, I build myself up to a certain point, like, like a CrossFit regional competitor, like 10 spots out from the games, like, really proud of that. But I was at a certain point physically where I'm like, man, I'm doing pretty good. And all of a sudden crash and burn and have to rebuild again. And then it's like, okay, I got one fake hip. I want to get my squat back to, 425, 450. Okay. I do that. All right, cool. I'm back at the top where I want to be, or getting there. And then all of a sudden the other hip goes out. It's not like I'm like happy about it or in a good mood all the time, but you never know as you're going through this process, what you're going to learn. And then when you're going to impact someone else with the information that you've gathered, like how do you rebuild yourself after an injury? Well, I've done it 7 times now. I can tell you how to do it, So you never know when one of your kids is going to blow a knee out and you're going to have to know like, hey, this is how we rehab this, or a friend's going to have something happen. And you're like, I've been through this, or something that looks like this. So you're always put in places like hip replacements or injuries or negative things so you can learn something and then pass it on to someone else or do better with it yourself the next time. So it's kind of like
a psychological approach to not being who you once were or now being sidelined. Like I did a podcast last week with a guy named Paul Gardner, he was a Marine, 21 years old, had his spine shot out with an AK-47. He's 40. He's my age. And his legs haven't worked at all since he was 21 years old. And hearing his story of recovery and how he adapted and overcame, man, it just made me realize like and I told him this during the podcast too. I was like, man, I was like pretty bummed out that the doctor was telling me I needed a new knee. That made me sad. Like, oh, I'm not going to be who I was. My jiu-jitsu is not going to be what it is. I can't run anymore. All these little things that poor me, right? Meanwhile, you haven't had any function below your belly button for 20 years and you're getting after it and you're loving life and you're married and you guys are going to have children, and like, it's all perspective, right? And so if you can use your experience to help gain perspective for other people, I think it's really important, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think, just to kind of cycle some of this back to police work, is that when you talk about transitioning to who you are today versus who you are yesterday, like we change day to day on a cellular level. Like you're not the same person tomorrow that you are sitting right now. Like physically, you're a different person. And having that concept in mind helps with you when you get into spots like that, like major injuries or some major change, so that you can transition into the new version of yourself. And like I saw people have a hard time with that in sports. So like after high school, you look back at dudes you played ball with and you're like, this dude could not transition from being a high school athlete to not being one. And then in college, it's even worse, where you look back and you see people and you're like, I played college ball with this dude, looks like shit. You know, he's 40 years old, like doesn't do anything with his life, like works on a road crew. And, you know, that's all he does, and then drink. And it's like, he couldn't transition from not being an athlete anymore. You know?
No, that's such an important conversation to have, because it's like Uncle Rico on Napoleon Dynamite, right? Like if coach put me in the fourth quarter, and then sure, that's just like a snippet of somebody's life, but it's so applicable to most soldiers and also police officers, because you find yourself where your career defines you as a man, right? And I've talked about this a lot. I think a big problem with PTSD and depression and the things that plague our professions as law enforcement officers, first responders, soldiers, Marines, a big part of that is because you start to identify your worth and who you are as a person with what you do. And you have to be able to separate those two things, because the day you walk away from the battlefield and you're not deploying to war anymore, or the day you're not a police officer anymore, or the day that you hang your cleats up and you're no longer a collegiate athlete, it's on to the next journey. You have to be looking forward, and you have to find something that interests you, something you can pursue, something you can put your energy into. And then again, like we said, something that offers community, because a lot of those things offer community, and you're around like-minded people. You're around people that you value, that you think that add value to your life. And now you're sitting on your couch and all those people aren't around you anymore. And it's easy to find yourself in a toxic position where, well, fuck, I guess I will drink, or I'm just going to sit around and I don't feel good. And before you know it, who you once were, you're no longer that person, simply because you allowed that to define you. And it's another reason that I push jiu-jitsu on a lot of people, is because if you do walk away from any of those things, fire department, police department, military, and you're looking for community, because all of those professions are community driven, right? If you don't have that, something feels off, something feels like it's missing. So you have to figure out the next phase of your life, but you also have to find that community again. I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you do that before you hit that point. And that's
sure.
Like,
yep.
You're never ready for it. Like you're never ready to be done. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, I'm not a football player anymore. And with cops, like, I'm not sure if you're aware of the stat with retirement, but the average officer is dead 5 years after retirement. That's that's a stat. That's psychotic that nobody really talks about that. And I think a lot of it is that there's like the grind of the job, but there's no transition point afterwards. And it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to do this, this shitty shift work and absorb all this like evil for 32 years. And then what? Then you retire and you die. That's not what we should be doing.
No.
This is a hard end date where it's like the goal is to get 20 years and be able to do something else with the skill set you've developed on the job, so you can move away from this.
I tell people that all the time. I think the profession of a law enforcement officer should be a decade.
I agree.
Because how many dudes do you know that have been on the road for 20 years that aren't disgruntled, that aren't tired of the profession? You know, because you can only have cortisol pumping through your veins for so long before it starts coming back to get you on the back end. And that's what we're seeing, you know?
Yeah, shift work alone will give you cancer. Now, shift work and being a cop, like what the hell do you think is going to happen here? What's your expectation?
Bro, I don't think a police officer is a reasonable job, to tell you the truth. Now, I'm not saying defund the police. We need law and order. We need it. Without police officers, this country would fall into chaos in 15 minutes, right? But to put this person in a position of power and tell them to go out there and solve the world's problems, it's almost, I don't even know how we expect police officers to do what they do. Because how many calls have you went to where you're dealing with this crazy problem that is not a law enforcement problem? Like I remember, like, I had this lady that was freaking out at the Seattle Tacoma International Airport because flights got closed down because of a blizzard and there was 3 inches of ice on the runway. And she can't get a hold of anyone to feed her goats back in Texas. My goats are starving. My goats are going to starve to death. I need to fly home. And she's like, starts getting so confrontational that she like grabbed a lady by the throat. And I was like, and here I am. I'm a 37-year-old man talking to a 60-year-old lady, trying to explain to her that, like, listen, I know you're from Texas, but what you just did is considered assault. You can't grab someone by their throat. I know your goats are hungry right now. Do you want me to go talk to the pilot and say, hey, I know you've decided to ground your aircraft because of ice on the runway, but this lady has hungry goats. So let's just take a chance. Let's try and take this fucking plane and see what happens. Like, and it sounds so stupid to even share this story, but as a patrol officer, you're dealing with that kind of stuff every single second of every single day. You don't get dispatched to talk about somebody's fucking the good day that they've had. You're always dealing with bullshit or you're dealing with criminal behavior, both of which are exhausting, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's dealing with people in crisis all day, every day. And then you can't be, and it's like, the way I described it the other day to somebody was like, it's like you have to be the epitome of detached reason and logic, right? Emotionally detached reason and logic. But you are approaching someone who is only emotion and can't access reason and logic. Like, again, like, what do you think is going to happen when these, the irresistible force meets the immovable object? And then you wonder how resistive subjects like just don't resist. And again, like, and this is where I think as law enforcement, we need to understand a little bit more on the opposite end of the spectrum, that like, hey, this person doesn't have the capacity to just stop resisting a lot of times, but it doesn't give them a pass for their behavior. And it doesn't give you permission not to be safe. But as the general public looking at that incident from body cam footage, like, we need to understand, like, this person's in a state of crisis and they have no ability to use their logic and reason, and this person is trained only to deal with logic and reason and to not deal with emotion at all. So it's a perfect storm for a disaster.
Exactly. And the thing is, and that's why I also think it's bizarre that we have like 21-year-old police officers, because conflict resolution, it takes that a certain level of maturity, and it takes that ability to, like you said, detach and not get emotionally invested. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings, right? And you can only be subjected to this kind of stuff so many times before it does start to take its toll on you. And dude, I can tell you, and I worked, I'm the first to say, I worked at the Port of Seattle, where our jurisdiction was the seaport and the airport. It was a very like low level agency when it comes to like violent crime or shootings or any of that kind of stuff. Like, obviously you're a patrol cop, so you get into some shit sometimes, but I understand. I wasn't working the beat in Chicago, right? But you don't realize how much of a toll patrol takes on you until you walk away. I'm telling you, man, like I've had a lot of people hit me up and be like, because when I initially got fired for the video, I had a lot of sheriffs from all over the country. They're like, hey, if you want to come back to work, you got a job at my department. And which was cool, right? But I'm telling you, I wouldn't go back to police work for $1 million a year because I feel like I can breathe better. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like a better version of myself. I feel happier. I feel younger. You don't realize how much that job is weighing you down until you walk away from it. And and I've got a lot of feedback from other officers because a lot of officers left the profession over the last year.
Oh yeah.
Just due to the nature of what took place. And I've heard a lot of people say similar thing. It's like, man, I didn't realize how heavy a burden it really is being a police officer, because that's your new baseline. That's your new normal. Waking up, like on days I was on patrol, I would have to sign into service at 5 and I lived an hour away. So I'm up at 3:30, which, I mean, I'm not giving a sob story. Everybody has to be on their grind, right? But what you find is being on the grind for a prolonged period of time starts to wear you down in a manner that you don't even really notice. And I can see how, if I did that for 20 years, how your mind and your body, just like you said, once you hit retirement, you're about fucking tapped out, you know?
Oh, yeah. Before that, usually, you know, you see it every day, but like, you know, we had a quadruple homicide here the other day where three children, like a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, were murdered. And then their mom were murdered, all murdered in the same room. And, you know, I went down to help on that scene. It was out of my area, out of my district, but I went down to help because I knew some of my buddies were there and they were calling for more assistance. So I was like, screw it, I'm gonna go. And when I got down there, the crime scene was already closed off, but you could tell, like, these are some good, tough cops, some friends of mine on the SWAT team. Right. And you could see in their eyes, like that fucked them up. And you can't do that for 20 years and expect that it's not going to take a little piece of you. And the way I've described it again to like non-cops is I'll tell them about these things and say, you know, we're acting as basically a filter for society. We are taking this and you're outsourcing your safety and dealing with these scenes to us. And we'll do it because for the most part, we can manage it better than the average person, I would say. Mm-hmm. But man, you got to cut us a little bit of slack on some shit, because otherwise you're going to have to go do that and it's going to melt your mind in a day and a half, you know?
Yeah. And nobody should have to experience that kind of stuff, but that's the world we live in. So somebody has to. Yeah. Those things are going to happen. And just like you said, who's going to clean up the mess, you know? And I honestly think the older you get, the more, at least for me, when I had my own children, that's when I started to value life differently and become more of a compassionate person. Because when I was a young ranger deploying all the time, I was reckless for several reasons. I didn't give a shit about other people, but I also didn't give a shit about myself. I was convinced I was going to die in combat. That's my destiny. I'm getting smoked in Iraq or Afghanistan. And again, like, that's not a sustainable approach to life, right? And it wasn't until I came home, I had my own kids, I was in the law enforcement profession, when I started learning more about myself and thinking like, man, your reckless approach and you not valuing human life, it puts you in a dark spot. And in what you find, at least in the military, and were you in the military?
No.
Okay. So for me, seeing a lot of stuff overseas, dead kids, dead bodies, that kind of stuff, it didn't faze me at the time. But once I started to grow older as a man and kind of understand who I am as a person better, and then also having my own kids, attaching a different value on human life, I would think about some of the things that we saw, some of the things that we did, and man, it affects me differently now. And the same is true for the profession of law enforcement. Like those cops that responded to those kids, sure, at the time I'm on shift and I'm doing my job, and they probably don't have a lot of emotion around it, just because you can't have a lot of emotion around horrific scenes, because it renders you combat ineffective. You have a job to do. You have a mess to clean up. But there's no free lunch. That stuff's going to come back around. They're going to have to process that emotion. They're going to have to feel that. They're going to have to think about those things. And if you don't do that now and you don't pay it now, you're going to pay it later. And for me, it started with counseling and opening up and like starting to really get in touch with who I am as a person. And I think our society is starting to see the need for that with veterans, but there's a need for it with police officers too.
Oh yeah.
Any cop that sees that kind of stuff, they should be getting professional help, not just your peer support group with your agency, but
Right.
You need to really delve into that stuff and cry about it and feel those emotions and try and come to as much peace as you can with it, because that shit just keeps piling up, and it will come back to haunt you.
It absolutely will. The some I've been talking to with people on that scene in the last I think just a week or two ago is when it happened. But there's some medics that I've talked to about it that were on scene, and it's like, how do we get better at having, because our agency has these big like crisis meetings to go and debrief these things, but nobody ever says anything. You know what I mean?
Of course not.
But then when you have a couple drinks with them, then all of a sudden it's like more of the details start coming out and they start to process it and you can kind of feel it, and it's like, how do we get better at providing actual services that aren't just like something to make the administration feel good that we did this. So if these
it's not just check the block.
Yeah. If these people kill themselves over all this stuff, it wasn't our fault, but how do we actually get better at it? And I think, we can try to like help each other, but there's got to be, like you said, professional intervention, because I can only help you and you can only help me so far before it's like, dude, I'm not a pro at this.
Well, and I've talked about it on my show a lot, but since this is going to go out on both our platforms, I'll tell you this. When I came home and I did 14 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. It was basically a 5-year chunk of my life where I was gone the entire time. And, I didn't know that I needed help. Like, I didn't even know that I needed help. And that's where a lot of people are at. And I ended up going to the VA because I injured my eye while I was on active duty. I hemorrhaged my retina. And once you get out of the military, any injuries that you sustain need to be, the smart thing to do is document them with the VA. That way, if they become a problem later in life, you can now say, hey, look, my eye is messed up because of a service-connected injury. So I went to the VA to do that, and I filled out their questionnaire, and they're like, okay, have you deployed? Okay, have you been subjected to this? Have you been subjected to that? Have you ever been in an ambush? Like all of these different metrics that they want to see what your experience is like. And I was like, I checked all of the boxes. Yes, I've been blown up. Yes, I've been shot at. Yes, I've been this. Yes, I've been that. And they're like, okay, well, the next step is you have to go see a counselor. And I was like, I don't want to see a counselor. I don't need a counselor, And they said, well, if you want to enroll into the VA process and be part of the system, you have to go see a counselor. This is part of the pipeline that you need to go through. Based on how you answered these questions, this is the next phase. So I said, okay, I guess I'll go. I'll play your game, bro. Best thing that ever happened to me, because I went into it thinking this is stupid and I don't need help. And she showed me that the exact opposite was true, that I was just being guarded, that I just put a wall up, that I had buried all of these emotions. And it was a good thing for a man to go through. Is like, the strongest thing that we can do as men, it's not how good of a fighter you are, how many fucking gunfights you've been in, or how fit you are. It's your ability to show vulnerability. Once you can be honest with the emotions that are inside of you and you can show vulnerability, that's where you really start to find growth. And this lady, she kind of laughed because she goes, all you special operations veterans are the same. She goes, you're like a cookie cutter, and she goes, and I have you guys figured out to a T, because I get all of these same answers from you all the time. And then 30 minutes later, you're crying. And she goes, and that's why there's a box of tissues in front of you. Those aren't there by chance. This is how these meetings go. And you know, why should we feel embarrassed about feeling emotions as men? Why should that be something that we try and hide or run from? Like, there's a reason that our bodies have emotional responses and cry and purge. And for some reason, I feel like there's the bravado culture of Americans. We've tried to somehow attach that to weakness or not being masculine. And the opposite is true. Being in touch with your emotions is the most masculine thing you can do. It doesn't make you weak. You know, it's the opposite. And so that's why I'm always so open about it, because I've had a lot of people write me. They're like, and I'm not saying this about myself because I'm just me. I'm just a normal guy. But when they hear a former Army Ranger who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, they think like I'm someone that is a tough, capable man. But then I also am open about crying and going to counseling. It gives some other people a pass to go try that themselves. And I've actually got a lot of feedback. They're like, man, hearing you talk about this made me go and kind of explore these different options. And it's the best thing that I've ever done. And that's why I'll continue to stand on my fucking pedestal and scream far and wide that you need to take care of yourself emotionally first.
Yeah. One of my sergeants. So after my first shooting that I was in, the process kicks on and it's like the whole world stops, and then you're taken away and you go take your drug test and they switch out your guns. It's a giant process. And I'm sure you know all about that. Every agency's got their own. But
I've never been involved in a shooting stateside. So, but yeah, I am familiar with it by hearing buddies go through it and whatnot.
Yeah, every agency has their own policy on like how they deal with police action shootings. But regardless of who I've talked to, it's kind of the same. Like, you get into a shooting stateside, domestic police work. It's like the record stops and you're removed and taken away. And I'll never forget the conversation on the way to the drug screening with my sergeant, who said, he said, "Good job." He goes, "You did everything exactly how you were trained." And he goes, he talked a little bit about this. He said, "Every time you do something like this, it scars your soul. Like, you are literally scarring your soul for the city that you work for, or the county, or whoever." And that really resonated, because I'm like, oh man, like, what do you do with the scar? Well, you got to work through that scar or it becomes a problem. Like, your bicep's not going to work right if you don't work the scar tissue out. So that's kind of where I started to understand a little bit more of like, all right, you're going to go do these things and you're going to absorb this shit for society, and you're going to get into fights and alleys, and you're going to get yourself all messed up physically and emotionally. And you have to be able to take that side, that extreme side of the darkness of life, and you have to be able to balance it with the light, with the happiness and the joy. And you got to be able to go through that and balance that dichotomy, or it's going to kill you, literally. And that's what, like, I'm definitely not opposed to counseling. I've been through, my fair share of stuff for, a few different things. But also, like, I get made fun of a lot because I love Disney. I love going to Disney World, and it's my fucking place. Like, and I get clowned on all the time for it. I'm like, well, to me, I'm like, I'll go to work and I'll deal with crime scenes and fighting people and chasing people and that kind of stuff. But I'll be damned if I'm not going to go and take my kids on, on Dumbo and enjoy the Magic Kingdom. Like, I'm going to do those things and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm not going to be sorry about it. I'm not going to be embarrassed about it. Like, I'm going to be a total nerd when it comes to that. And when I go back through the Magic Kingdom doors, I'll probably cry with my daughter. You know what I mean? Like, I will do that, and I'm okay with it.
No, I love that, dude. That's awesome. Like, I did a post a couple days ago on my Instagram, and I was talking about exactly that, how just the American culture of what a tough man is doesn't involve going on a Dumbo ride through Magic Kingdom, right? Yeah. And I was talking about the Book of Five Rings, because it talks about, are you familiar with that book?
No.
So it was written by a Japanese samurai, and that's one of his things. He's like, in order to be like the most proficient warrior on the battlefield, that also involves being able to balance it out and embrace the arts of calligraphy and poetry and painting and tending your garden and all these things that, like, the American culture would look at. And I joked, I'm like, if I was a ranger and on Friday night when I was with the Ranger Regiment, I didn't want to go out and get blacked out drunk and fist fight people in the streets of Tacoma. No, you know what? I'm going to actually, I'm going to write poetry tonight. I'm going to sit this one out, guys. People be like, what the fuck? You know? So our culture hasn't been good about finding the balance that you're speaking of, but that's important, man. Everything has a balance to it. And if you let the pendulum swing one direction too far, even if it's in a direction that is rooted in capabilities and fitness and fighting and shooting, all the things that like we think are important as soldiers or as police officers, you're not taking a balanced approach to life. You're letting the pendulum swing one direction, and you're setting yourself up for a fucking a disaster later in life.
Yeah, and it's just literally a time bomb as to when that is going to occur. It could be in 5 minutes. It could be, 5 years. It could be after you retire. Who knows? It's just luck of the draw.
Yep. I see him shutting the lights off in the back and Jim's closed, huh?
Yeah. Well, that might be my cue. But yeah, dude, I gotta go, but I would love to do this again.
Say when, man. This so like I said, this is my new life, is running my gym and doing podcasts, and it's actually been rewarding and fun, and I'm enjoying it. And so yeah, whenever works for you, works for me, man.
Cool. All right, before we jump off, where can people find more about you or whatever you're doing? Are you promoting anything right now? Are you running anything other than your gym?
So my Instagram, it's Granderson, GR Anderson 33, and that has a link tree to all of my stuff. My podcast is doing very well. It's called The Endless Endeavor, and it's on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, like any podcast platform. And we're on YouTube as well. But outside of podcasting, yeah, my biggest focus is training jiu-jitsu and running my academy here in Lake Stevens, Washington. And then I'm also running a capabilities camp. It's called Guns and Geese, and it teaches people the basics of firearm fundamentals and grappling fundamentals. And but like we just said, we also do campfire discussions, and we talk about vulnerability. We talk about how to care and how to be proud of who you are, and all the little things that get left out of capability type seminars. And so that's actually going really well. We're coming up on class 3, but we run it in New Orleans. And so
okay,
class 3 won't be until October because nobody wants to train in New Orleans in July and August. But it's been good, man. It's been a change for me. It's something new. And everybody that's attended the camp has really loved it. So I'm looking forward to doing more of those as well.
That's very cool. Do you have the dates in October? Do you know when that
October
is?
October 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Okay, cool. Sweet. Awesome, man. I'm going to wrap it up there.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Of course, man.